to episode 233 of the Daily Fantasy Edge. My name is Adam Levitan. I am one of the analysts here at DraftKings. I am the father of the most beautiful beast in the world, Jerry. And we are coming off of bird carcass week. Yes, that's right. I hope you took the full bird carcass. You buttered up the skin inside. You stuffed the anus with various vegetables. You set it right in the middle of your beautiful kitchen table, and you celebrated the time we came to a foreign land and massacred the natives. Yes, I hope it was great. Really hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Actually, last comment I'm going to make on Thanksgiving, I really do want to put this to bed, but last comment. If Thanksgiving food is so great, if it's this thing that everybody salivates over all year, then why aren't there tens or hundreds of restaurants serving full turkeys with sides of mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce? I mean, why? I mean, if it's the best out there, if it's so good that everybody just loves it so much, I mean, every commercial break during the Thanksgiving NFL games, oh, what is Drew Brees' favorite side? Oh, what does Mark Ingram eat on Thanksgiving? Like, oh my God, it's so painful. But anyways, if this was the best stuff ever, these restaurants, you'd have a printing press on your hands. Just so much money. You'd be the most popular restaurant in town every day. Do you know why there are very, very few places that even have Thanksgiving food on their menu, let alone specialize in it? Because it's actually bad. It's actually bad. I'm just going to leave it at that. Going to get to some very, very exciting podcast news in a bit. Obviously, we'll get to listener questions later, but I want to start with the Week 12 main slate and the news that came out kind of on the later side. And there was quite a bit of it at the running back position. First, the status of Melvin Gordon, which was super interesting given Austin Eckler's talent level and his price at $3,700. The problem was that game started at 4 p.m. Eastern, which turned out to be a pretty big problem. Also, Alex Collins' foot issue, maybe healthy scratch, not quite sure, but he got announced as a surprise inactive about an hour before lock. So whereas before we had concerns about Gus Edwards maybe handling only 60 to 70% of the early down work, we could now project him closer to 90 or 100. And that's a huge difference because I thought Gus Edwards was already pretty thin because he projected for 0 targets. And really, any running back that projects for 0 targets on DraftKings is going to be thin regardless of their price, but particularly at 4,400, which is where Gus Edwards was at. But once Alex Collins was out, I thought that was a big change because he was so likely to push over 15 towards 20 carries and have a ton of touchdown equity. Also on Sunday morning, the NFL Network report on Josh Adams, Eagles running back Josh Adams. And we knew based on Week 11 usage that Adams was at the front of the Eagles committee. But this report said he'd really be featured, much like Jay Ajayi was at the end of last year. So, that made sense. Sometimes these reports I question. That report actually made sense given the way that Wendell Smallwood, Corey Clement had played, given the way Josh Adams was used the previous week against New Orleans. So I thought we had a reasonable shot at 20 touches, plus pass down work, plus goal line work for Josh Adams at 3,800 against the Giants' run defense, which has just been getting buried without Damon Harrison. And I mean, that's pretty strong. Josh Adams had a 58-yard touchdown call back on a weak holding call, missed some time with a banged up shoulder, and still had 16 DraftKings points. So in hindsight, I mean, yeah, there were a ton of strong running back plays, right? Like Matt Breida, I didn't even mention Alfred Morris got scratched, surprisingly. Nick Chubb at 6,300, he's like a lock for 20 touches, and his pass game role was starting to expand. Leonard Fournette, 6,700. Obviously, James Conner and Christian McCaffrey were strong. It's just a weekly thing with so many running backs. It creates a real problem, honestly. Like, on one hand, passing on truly exceptional value like Josh Adams or whatever, or maybe Gus Edwards is a pretty big mistake, especially at running back, right? On the other hand, there's so much opportunity cost because the way the running backs are used now creates this just like absurd ceiling. We saw it with CMC and Saquon this week. So like, yeah, Josh Adams is an awesome play. But when you play Josh Adams and Gus Edwards, well, you don't leave yourself room to get on Barkley, McCaffrey, and Connor or whatever you wanted to do. So, yeah, I mean, the running back position has been the story of the year. There's just so many of them that are just being used in these incredible ways in full PPR scoring. Also wanted to talk about the tight end decision. And it was really, for me, I thought that George Kittle or Zach Ertz was the play. And I felt pretty strongly that Ertz was the one that was right. I was surprised a bit by the way ownership shook out. George Kittle 32% in the Wildcat, Zach Ertz 24%. I thought Ertz was clearly the better play for a few reasons. First and foremost, and really most importantly, quarterback play. I mean, you just can't compare Carson Wentz to Nick Mullins. Like the chance of the Eagles and Carson Wentz at home against the Giants just doing nothing is so small. And the 49ers on the road with Nick Mullins, well, we saw, when people say hashtag defense doesn't matter, like if you suck, if you don't have a lot of talent around you, you can certainly fail even against the Bucs. And that's what we saw with Nick Mullins. Also, I know a lot of people went to Kittle because Marquise Goodwin was ruled out late with a personal issue. I actually thought this was really bad for Kittle. Like Goodwin's speed, much like Deshaun Jackson has done throughout his career, Goodwin's speed makes a huge difference for the rest of the offense. So effective at drawing defensive attention and just like opening the middle of the field where Kittle operates. And then we had other kind of smaller things like Ertz was at home off of a dud, whereas Kittle was on the road. Ertz's target floor and ceiling have both been way higher than George Kittle's all year. So for just 200 more, I made sure I went to Ertz, and that ended up making a big difference. He outscored Kittle by like 10 points, and that certainly makes a big difference. One thing about playing both Josh Adams and Gus Edwards was it almost forced you onto Odell. Couldn't play Connor and McCaffrey because 2 of the 3 running back spots were already taken. We had all this salary. And I really, really liked the spot for Odell Beckham. Like, so clear the game plan should be to throw. That's what everybody does against this bad Eagles secondary, like literally playing with 3 to 4 corners off the street. Of course, I should have known that this clown Beckham isn't even on hashtag Team Water, like dude doesn't like water, doesn't drink water and gets cramps. He misses the first series of the second half because he's getting an IV, does nothing from there. Just total joke. In all seriousness, though, I think Odell hit the bottom of his range pretty squarely in this spot. Like, it would have been hard for him to perform worse. And it was still 13.5 points. So, still think Odell was a pretty strong play. Not too upset about that. But it was certainly costly, obviously, because a lot of the wide receivers in the mid-range had good games. Keenan Allen, T.Y. Hilton, etc. Tyler Boyd, guys I like that. So, maybe going more mid-range at wide receiver would have helped, but Manny Sanders and DJ Moore, who I played, had really good games anyway. So it is what it is. I'm not too upset about it. Let's get to the 4-man, and the listeners struck in a big way. Big Ball Bokey decided to only play one of the cheap running backs. Went with Gus Edwards, spent on Saquon and Connor, which then forced him off Odell and onto the mid-range wide receivers. He went Boyd, DJ Moore, Manny Sanders, really like that. I would also note that Big Ball Bokey played Cam Brate, which I thought Cam Brate was okay. It's not like he was that cheap, though, for his projected target share. And the more I thought about Ertz and the context of the slate, I thought Ertz was really, really strong. Brate's target share only ended up around 10%, and that's like where he was last year. And yeah, he did get 2 end zone targets. I think he dropped 1 and caught 1, but that 10% is scary, and that's where he was last year when O.J. Howard was out. So I do think Cam Brate will be pretty touchdown dependent going forward, like a lot of the tight ends in that sub 4K range. Of course, the key to the whole slate, and none of us did it in the 4-man, but the key to the whole slate was did you or did you not play Christian McCaffrey? McCaffrey was certainly an awesome play. Like we've talked about all year about his role. It's like impossible for him to fail just because his pass game role is just so outrageous. Now he's getting goal line role also and running the ball so well. The problem for me was, given Melvin Gordon and Tyrell Williams news, I wanted some late game flexibility. Like if Melvin Gordon sat, Eckler would have been the best play on the board. If Tyrell Williams sat, Mike Williams would have been really strong too. By the way, Tyrell only ended up playing 9 snaps. And in all honesty, I thought Connor was close to McCaffrey, or if not, just as good of a play as McCaffrey. So, when close in that decision, giving yourself late game flexibility when there's injury news, I thought made sense. But in hindsight, it probably wasn't true, right? It probably wasn't true that Connor was just as good of a play as McCaffrey, just because we know the floor of the Steelers offense when on the road in a tough environment against a capable defense is really low. And meanwhile, we already talked about Christian McCaffrey's floor. It's just outrageous. So yeah, maybe it was bad considering they were the same price. Basically, if you played someone in head-to-head who had Christian McCaffrey, you likely lost. I think my lineup beat most non-CMC lineups, which allowed me to salvage the week. 4-man standings. Myself, 5 wins. Listeners, 3 wins. Al, 3 wins. Peter continues to languish in last with 1 win. All right, let's get to the Listener League, and it was the biggest it's ever been at 8,100 entries. And yes, it filled, albeit close to lock. Now, for week 13, it has finally happened. The hashtag Make It Bigger movement has reached its climax. The league has exploded from 8,100 to, yes, 10,000 entries on a $5 buy-in. 50K prize pool, $5 buy-in, 3 entry max tournament. All jokes aside, now this is really the best tournament on DraftKings. I'm not even exaggerating. You could argue, I guess, that the tournament is tougher than your standard tournament on DraftKings because all you listeners are far sharper from the average player. You guys are trying harder. You're probably on Twitter where you're getting good information or some information, etc. But still, I think those factors are mitigated by a rake-free structure, a 3-max structure, and optimal flat payouts, paying out 24% of the field on a flat structure, rake-free on a 50K prize pool is just, for sure the best tournament on DraftKings. So do not embarrass us by letting this thing overlay. Go to DK Playbook, find the logo for this podcast, go to the landing page, find the link. It's really not that hard. You can also just Google to find the landing page. And if you still can't find it, just give up on life. It's over. So the dream has been realized. 10K Listener League, pretty crazy on a $5 3-max. Back to the Week 12 Listener League, in first place was The Dirt. The Dirt went Luck, Hilton, Doyle stack, pretty popular stack. Luck 13%, Hilton 20%, Doyle 8%. Didn't bring it back with anybody on Miami. Obviously, you had to have Christian McCaffrey to win anything in GPPs this week. He was 19% owned in the Listener League. The key for Dirt was David Moore at 3%, got that late TD on that 4th down. And then Chubb and Breda, Nick Chubb and Breda going off for 47 points. No Adams and no Edwards. Got him off Odell, etc. Just so many running backs you could win with, though. But Chubb and Breda was a great combo for price and upside. Great lineup. See you in the Week 13 4-man, The Dirt. In second place was BLK Fan. He went Russ, David Moore, and Tyler Lockett. Brought it back with Christian McCaffrey and DJ Moore. So game stack. Really liked that game stack. It was a game that was very likely to be close. It was a game that had a chance to be high scoring. We know Doug Baldwin is just total dust. We know Carolina's cornerbacks can be beat. So 5 guys from that game. And then his other 4 guys were Saquon, Ertz from the same game, Gus Edwards, and Patriots D. Very nice game stack optimization there from BLK Fan. Congrats on your second place finish. In third place was Cowboy Bill, Cam, DJ Moore, Christian McCaffrey, no Seattle players, Gus Edwards, and Nick Chubb. The big key for him, though, was Juju Smith-Schuster at 2%. Obviously, a very difficult matchup against Chris Harris, but Pittsburgh, surprisingly to me, came out with a really pass-heavy game plan. And when they do that, their concentration of targets is so tight. Juju is just so absurd and so young, and he just keeps making these long TDs. It's wild. He went off for a 40 ball. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey for a 50 ball. That's a lot of points. Cowboy Bill also went contrarian at tight end, David Njoku, whose targets have been all over the place, but we know the talent he has. We know the matchup against Cincinnati was awesome. So nice lineup there from Cowboy Bill. Congrats on third. Hope to see you all in the peak Week 13 Listener League. All right. Now it is time for everyone's favorite portion of the program. Producer Luke, hit the theme music. All right, thanks to everybody for the questions. As always, got a bunch of good ones. You can send them anytime to @the DFS Edge on Twitter. Question 1 comes from Michael Mussett. He says, I'm curious on how you decide what is something you want to put out there in a tweet. What is your process and how do you track what is relevant or not to the public? Good question. So for me, I keep it very, very simple. I'm constantly researching, looking for information, for data, for nuggets, for news that will help my rosters, my lineups, my teams be better on Sunday. When I find something relevant, I share it on Twitter. That's it. It's not rocket science. There's no grand plan. There's no manipulation. I just do the normal research that I would do for a slate myself, and then I share that stuff. If it's relevant to me, then it's very likely to be relevant to other people that are playing DFS. And I think, right, like that's a big benefit for me, for my Twitter or whatever. It's just like I'm grinding so hard trying to win that I know exactly what real players need to know, what's important to them. And I've talked a lot on here about how important I think being niche is. Like, I don't share things that may be important to season-long people or to general NFL fans. The only things that I share are ones that would affect DFS players like me. And honestly, I think that's the way society is going, right? Like less generalization, more a la carte, more specialty. Like I have 400 channels on my stupid cable box. I watch like 4 of them. It's like so absurd. I just want to be able to watch what I actually watch. And all that niche stuff, I think in the next 5-10 years is going to be where business is going. But anyways, so that's kind of my take on the Twitter thing. It's really not rocket science. And I think that comes through on the people that are following me. And then, of course, I also share things about hashtag team sex and dogs and whatnot. Got to mix it up a little. Question 2 comes from Brodo. Since we had a kid, our dog has become seemingly / understandably jealous and noticeably sad. She still gets love, just not as much attention as a human. Advice on managing this, lifting her spirits. Yeah, Brodo, don't bring this garbage in here, dude, okay? If you were going to ignore your dog when you had a kid, then you shouldn't have had a kid. Or you should have never gotten a dog. I know having a kid is overwhelming, believe me, I get it. But you can't let your poor beast suffer. Okay, so here's what you do. Maybe you don't have as much time for the dog, but you need to make that time more impactful. So you get fully nude, just like she always is. You pick the dog up and you hold the dog to your chest with you, much like you would a baby, kind of chest to chest. And then you kind of sway. You slow dance back and forth. And you do this every day for about 2 to 3 minutes, a special pants off bonding time. And that will work, trust me. Your dog will be a happy pup again. You just got to show it some love. Question 3 comes from Hooder is Gooder. He says, hey, Adam, I'd like to know what you think the chances a DFS fish like myself, who makes lineups on mobile while laying in bed Sunday morning, has to realistically ship a big field GPP. I do minimal research, e.g. I listen to the pod. Thanks. To be honest, pretty low. I mean, first of all, shipping a big field GPP is just so insanely hard in the first place. So, yeah, of course you could get lucky and win one. Anyone could get lucky and win one. There's plenty of terrible players and terrible lineups that have won the Millie Maker. I mean, that really means nothing to me other than, that person is hashtag how rich now. Like, doesn't mean they're good or their process is right or anything like that. But I do think that you're giving yourself the best chance if you're not on your phone, if you're not just clicking buttons. Like, you're not seeing the full player pool on your phone. You can't see all the news happening in real time. You're not tracking line movement. You're not keeping track of your allocations. So, I mean, can you win? Of course. But I think you're taking the worst of it if you're lying in your bed on your phone for sure. Question 5 comes from Bino the Kid. He says, can you explain the running back defense stack for me, please? We haven't talked much or at all really this season about correlation. There was a time maybe a couple years ago where everyone was obsessed with correlation, thought it was like the most important thing. It's certainly overrated, I think, for a couple of reasons that I'll get to. But basically what it means is we're trying to figure out what positions work well with each other. They correlate positively for GPPs. We actually have a correlation page on Labs dedicated to this, shows the overall correlations within teams, all kinds of other variables. But, generally speaking, like the top correlation, obviously, is a quarterback and his wide receiver 1 at plus 0.54 points. I'd also note that quarterback and his running back one is also strong at plus 0.44. Quarterback and opponent's wide receiver one starts moving down, 0.36. Solid, but not out of this world. And then we get to what Bino talked about, running back and defense. Running back and his own defense. That's only 0.18. So it's pretty weak correlation. But basically, the idea is if a defense plays really well, if it dominates, if it forces turnovers, if it gets sacks, gets a lead, then there are more overall attempts, more red zone attempts for a running back. And I think this applies more to guys like Adrian Peterson, to guys like Nick Chubb, to guys who aren't necessarily big-time pass catchers, who have people behind them like Chris Thompson, like Duke Johnson, who would play in the event their defense plays poorly. I think one thing to note on correlation for GPPs is the idea of working backwards. As I've mentioned on previous podcasts, if you're playing GPPs optimally, you have to be trying to get first place. So if you have to think, what would have to happen here for me to get first place, and then work backwards from here, there's some really unique things that have to happen. It would be an outlier from the typical correlations. So yeah, I think these correlation things are good to think about. I'm not sure it's good to obsess over at all. Question 6 comes from Tom Ellsworth. He says, how do you feel about iPad tipping? Does someone deserve a tip for doing nothing more than handing me a muffin? Haven't addressed tipping too much this season. One of my favorite topics for sure. And since we've last spoke about tipping, yes, the spread of these iPad or Square payment devices has been wild. Like every merchant has them now. And every time you buy something, it asks you, do you want to tip? It gives the percentage amount, that suggested percentage amount that you should tip. I consider myself one of the world's foremost authorities and most generous tippers, relative to wealth, obviously, there is. And it's not because I'm a great guy or anything like that. It's out of guilt and out of fear. Guilt that someone is doing something for me that I likely should be doing myself. And, fear that they'll mess with my food or not do as good of a job or whatever if I don't tip well. That's where pre-tipping comes in, by the way. And you can go back to old episodes to hear the pre-tipping take. But anyways, I don't believe that we have to tip when the task at hand is simply ringing us up. I really don't. I go to this smoothie store like 5 times a week, like it's a block away from me. If I get a pre-made shake, one from the fridge, it's already made, it's in the fridge, I give $0 tip on the iPad. But if I order a shake from scratch, a smoothie from scratch, they actually have to get the banana and the berries and, make it and clean the blender, etc. Then it's, a couple bucks for sure. And I think the workers get that, right? Like, even though the iPad prompts for a tip, they have to know they're just ringing someone up. That's not tip worthy. Question 7 comes from Nihal Advani. He says, do you think DFS, quote unquote, touts should be required to show their results prior to touting? Do you think it's bad for the industry when people who don't play DFS are providing insights/plays? So I've talked about this a lot in the past. I really don't want to get into a whole big thing again. First of all, I hate the word tout. I really don't consider myself a tout. I'm not out here saying, buy my picks. Buy this 4-pack of picks for $99.99. You'll be a millionaire tomorrow. I'm, 60 and 15 in my last 24 5-star plays. All that stuff is just straight lies. I don't say, here are my picks, buy them. I really, really, really just try to give information and let people make decisions for themselves. And believe me, I understand there's a thin line there because information can lead people to certain things. But that's really the thing of it for me. No one should be out there looking for picks. It's just so dumb. Like, I know it's easy, right? Like, but I can guarantee you that you won't win in the long run just buying picks from someone, from some clown. Like, our goal should be to gather as much good information as possible to help us make our own picks. So in that instance, it doesn't matter if the person is winning or losing or playing DFS or not. Like, my most valuable quote unquote tout is Pro Football Focus or Labs, right? Best data. They're not even people. It's just information. Like, that to me is the best tout. Now, of course, there are always going to be people trying to prey on the weak out there, There's always going to be that. And then we have problems, right? Then we have touts who don't play or who play really small stakes, who say they play, but really they just throw like some clown lineups in GPPs, which to me isn't really playing. And that's a problem because they're not giving you information. They're just giving you their crappy picks. And likely, if they're not really playing or they're not winning, they don't understand the context of a slate. So yeah, I think it's hard to be one of these touts that actually give plays and don't actually play for some reasonable stakes or play for some stakes because you don't understand the context of the slate, right? Like maybe you like Case Keenum, and maybe Case Keenum's a fine play, but you don't play, so you don't understand that he's only 600 less than Patrick Mahomes. Like you don't understand roster construction, which is a huge part of it. But look, man, like to me, this business of fantasy analysts, and believe me, I still can't believe that this is even a business, but whatever. To me, it's about giving information. As soon as someone starts trying to give me picks or selling picks, I know they're almost certainly a total clown who doesn't really know what they're talking about. Question 8 comes from Harbs. He says, you thinking about trying to get into this DraftKings sports betting championship? Yeah, I will almost certainly be in there. Have read about it some. Don't quite understand it fully yet, but it sounds pretty cool. The basic premise is it's a $10,000 buy-in. Everybody starts with $5,000 in dollars, quote unquote dollars, to bet with on the Friday of the NFL divisional round. Whoever runs up that $5K into the most money by Sunday night wins the prize. First prize is $1 million guaranteed, I believe. So obviously, like there's a ton of strategy, which I'm not going to go into on here for obvious reasons, but I'm confident I'll have a really good strategy. And yeah, I think it'll be really fun. I think it's a cool idea, like sports betting contests. I haven't really done one in the past. Did one, I guess, at the Gambling Olympics, but I think more than picking the right games, there's way more strategy in that when you're doing a sports betting contest. So I'm looking forward to it. All right. That is going to do it for another edition of the Solo Pod. We'll be back Thursday night for the 3-man game-by-game breakdown with Al and Pete. For Jerry, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.
We are promoters at DraftKings and also avid fans. Our usernames are Adam Levitan, Al Smizzle, and CSU Ram 88. We may sometimes play on our personal accounts in the games that we offer advice on. Although we have expressed our personal view on the games and strategies in this podcast, they do not necessarily reflect the views of DraftKings, and we also may deploy different players and strategies than what we recommended in this podcast.